Okay, so we're going to resume with lesson 4. So what we've done so far is we've set up a product model and we related it to our category model. We figured out this one-to-many relationship, and then we've used the migrations tool in Visual Studio to automatically generate our tables. We've also made an update where we've made another migration so that we can continue to keep our models and our database in sync. So again, the slide deck is on Blackboard. It's in lesson 4. If you want to read a bit more about migrations, we can have a quick look at this. I'm not going to go through the article, but or the documentation, but this basically describes, you know, how migrations work. So we've basically done what's here through Visual Studio, and then it explains, you know, what happens as we evolve, as our models evolve. So we've kind of done this, but it also explains, you know, working in team environments and sort of more advanced tools with migrations. If you're interested in reading more about that. Okay, we haven't actually launched our project today, so I'm going to start up my project now. I'm going to click debug and start without debugging. So here's our site as we left it off last week. So now I want to show you, here's sort of the real power of Visual Studio. Once we figured out this model, we want to use the scaffolding tools in Visual Studio to build our controllers, functional controllers and views. So we've created a categories controller, and we created some views for the categories. I'm going to delete these, you know, so right now when we click on shop, it calls the index method in our categories controller. You know, we did this a couple weeks ago. We created some fake categories. And when we click on one, it goes to a browse method that displays the category. Or we could click on add new. We built this form last week and it gives us a view. So we were just sort of playing around with this stuff, but it was disconnected from the database. So I'm going to actually delete these files, and we're going to regenerate a working categories controller and views. So in my Solution Explorer, I'm going to delete the categories controller, first of all. I'm also going to delete under views categories, I'm going to delete this whole subfolder. So in views categories, we'll delete those 3 views. The code will still be in the earlier commits on my Git repository if you want to see them. So, but we're going to recreate them with a lot more functionality. So then in my Solution Explorer, I'm going to right-click controllers. I'm going to pick Add Controller. Now, the last time when we built the controller, we built an empty controller. This time we want the third option. We want MVC controller with views using Entity Framework. So what is this going to do? Well, here's our description. An MVC controller with actions and razor views to create, read, update, and delete, and list entries from an Entity Framework data context. That's our application DB context. It's our database connection class that uses Entity Framework to connect to and interact with our SQL Server database. So I'm picking this third option, MVC controller with views using Entity Framework, and I'm going to click Add. So in this little window, it says, okay, you want a new controller. What model does this controller use? So I want my category model. It automatically names it categories controller. plural. It wants to know which database connection object are we using. So I'll click this dropdown. We only have one. We're using our application DB context that Visual Studio created and we've modified today. And then I want my views. If this is empty, I want to browse under views and shared. I want to pick my underscore layout CSHTML file. So I'll leave this up for a second. So these are all the options I want for my new controller with views using Entity Framework. The category model, our application DB context class, our shared layout page, and the name will be categories controller. So select all these options. And this is basically what you're doing in your assignment. You're going to make the models and then you're going to use the scaffold to build the views and controllers. So let's click add. And the scaffold will take a minute to run. So this is going to generate 6 files, 1 controller, and 5 new views. So when the scaffolding is done, Visual Studio is going to open up our new controller. So let's have a look at what's here. We'll poke around and then we'll try it. So it's created a categories controller. It makes a reference to our database connection object, and it gives it the name of underscore context. So the context is our database connection. It creates a constructor, and our constructor, as a dependency, it requires an instance of our database connection. So you can't create an instance of our controller if you don't provide a connection to the database, because the controller isn't going to work. None of the methods in it are going to be viable. They're not functional unless they have a database connection object to work with. So it's declared globally in this class. So it's available in all the methods. So let's look at what methods we get. We have a method called index. We've seen that before. So what do you suppose is happening on line 25? What will the categories index method do? If you try to interpret the code I've highlighted in blue. Right, it's querying, it's using our database connection, our application DB context. It's using this DB set that we called categories, and it's fetching a list. So it queries the database and fetches a list, and then it returns the index view and displays the list. So we can go and look at this view. So I deleted this folder under views and categories, but the scaffolding regenerated it, and here's our index view. So if we open it up, it's going to look somewhat like the page we had previously, right? It's got a model at the top. What kind of data does this page work with? This page receives an IEnumerable, a list of categories. At the top, we've got a link to create a new one. Yep, we'll talk about the asynchronous code in a minute. And then it uses a table to display the categories, and it's got edit, details, and delete links for each one. So that's our index method. It'll display all the categories in the categories table. There's a details method that takes an ID parameter. So in this case, instead of getting a list of categories, it uses our database connection and our categories DB set and calls first or default and passes in the ID. We'll go over this code more later, but I'm just kind of giving an overview. So this is going to select a single category object and pass it to the view called details. If we look at the details view, It has a model of type category, but it's not IEnumerable because the details page displays one category, doesn't display a list. And there's pre-built code that will display the category and also include links to the edit and index views. We've got other methods. We've got methods for creating a category, one that displays a form, and one that processes a form post that will add a new category from the form and save it, commit that change to our database. We've got methods, a get and a post for edit, display the edit page, and submit the edit, which will do an update and save the changes. And we've also got a delete method. Load the delete page to display the category we want to delete, and then a post that calls remove and again calls save changes. So all of this is working code. We'll want to make some modifications to it, but the basics are all actually here. So let's try this. So I'm going to go back to my browser. I'm maybe going to change this label on the layout. It says shop now. These pages for managing the categories, these aren't really shopping pages. They're not for customers. They would be for the store owner. So I'm just going to change the link here to just say categories, and we'll make it so that it still calls our index view. So I'm going to open up my layout file under views, shared, and layout. And I'm just going to change the text on the link. So on line 26, the link is already accurate. It goes to the categories controller. It calls the index method. I'm just going to change the text. I don't want this to say shop now. I just want this to say categories. So this page is public for now, but in a couple weeks, we're going to make it private. So only a site administrator can see this link and can use it. So I'm changing my link, so my nav bar now says home and categories. I'll refresh the site. This link should get updated. Oops, I'll go back to the home page. So now my nav bar says home and categories, and when I click it, I get basically an empty page that just says create new. So I'm going to click create new, and it loads our create view. It's automatically got an input here for name. The ID is hidden. Why would the ID be hidden?
Isn't it automatically generated by the tables? Like every input, a new ID will be created?
Right. Because we set it as identity, it's a primary key field. We don't want an input for it. That happens in the database. So let's try these pages out and see if does the CRUD actually work. Let's put some categories in our clothing store. If you want to use the chat or your mic, make some suggestions. What should we put in our database?
Men's, women's, unisex.
Okay. Yeah. I think we'll do it this way. I'll maybe pick, we could do it that way, Jeffrey, up to you. I'll pick styles of clothes. So notice when I filled out my form, it's saved to the database. So I'll put in bottoms and maybe shoes. So create 3 or 4 categories in your database. So even though we haven't written any code at all, we have a functioning website, right? We scaffolded the controller. Our index method queries the database and fetches the list. Our create works. What about this? To be changed and deleted. So I'll create this category. And now when I click on edit, here's my URL, calls categories edit, passes in the category ID. I can change the data. And now I can delete it. So the scaffolding gives us working pages that we can do all the create, read, update, and delete. We don't have to write the code for this. So this, as you can imagine, is going to save us lots of time. So this is basically what I'm asking you to do for your assignment. Yes, absolutely. It is so much easier. So really the work, again, is what we did in the last hour of class. It's this part. What models do I need and how are they related?
What question are you answering? I don't see anything in the chat.
Oh, Taylor just pointed out that this is so much easier to build. I was just responding to her comment. But yeah, she posted it privately, so I guess no one else could see the comment. So we've got categories. I want to scaffold actually, sorry, before I scaffold, a couple other things in the code we should look at, because Jeffrey and Kevin mentioned that code is asynchronous. So here's our categories controller we scaffolded. This is the home controller that Visual Studio gave us, right? So here's the index method. In the home controller, here's the index method in our categories controller. There are a few differences, and some of them have to do with asynchronous. So what things do you see are different between this index method and this index method? Yeah, okay, Lindsay, what's one thing you notice that's different? Right, okay. So in the home controller, yes, we're just loading a view. We're not passing any data. Whereas in this version, in our categories, we're passing some data to the view. Yep. What else is different between them? Right. In our scaffolded controller, it returns a task object of type iActionResult. In the home controller, it only returns iActionResult. So, and then we also see async and await. So the async task and await, and also here we're getting a list, but we're getting it asynchronously. We don't really need to use asynchronous code in our controller, but this is now the default when you scaffold the controller. So I could change this method if I wanted to. I'll just show you. I'm going to put it back, so don't make changes. I could do this. I could just make it a regular method this way with no asynchronous code, but the scaffolding gives us synchronous code. What is synchronous? Sorry, gives us asynchronous code. So what is asynchronous code? Why does it have these async and await? What does that asynchronous code do? Have you guys done any asynchronous programming yet, or probably not yet? Okay, so our controllers in Visual Studio are asynchronous. You're going to work with asynchronous code next semester in JavaScript frameworks as well. So the idea of asynchronous code, most code that we write like this is synchronous. So yeah, Mike, you're on the right track. So synchronous code. So let's say, for example, we want to write data to a file and send an email. Traditional code is synchronous, meaning step one, we write to the file, and maybe that takes 30 seconds. So we're going to start writing to the file, and then nothing's going to happen. Our program is going to wait until that file finishes being written, and when it's finished, then we'll send an email next, 30 seconds later. Asynchronous code allows us to run multiple processes on the same thread. So we could start writing code to a file, and then we could send an email at the same time. And then when the file is finished, execution will revert back. So it's basically just designed for performance. So one process doesn't block the next process. We can do multiple things in parallel with asynchronous code. So typically we get faster performance. So Node.js was built this way from the ground up. And now when we scaffold controllers in Visual Studio, the default is that our code all happens asynchronously. So we see this async keyword. And what the task means is our method will return an iAction result, but maybe not right away. It may have to complete some operations before it can return this iAction result. So all of the methods by default are asynchronous. We don't have to use asynchronous code. We could write additional methods here that are not asynchronous. So for example, this one here isn't. Because this code doesn't use the database at all, they didn't write it asynchronously. It's just regular synchronous code. Just call the method and load the view. But typically, where we're talking to the database and processing, these things are happening asynchronously. Okay, so we've created the categories controller. I want to go ahead and create a product controller as well. And then we're also going to see that the scaffolding, how it's going to handle the relationship we've created between the product and the category model. So I'm going to go back to Solution Explorer, and I'm going to repeat the exact same process we just did. I'm going to right-click my controllers. I'm going to add a controller. I'm going to pick the same option, MVC controller with views, using Entity Framework. And I'll add. Notice it now remembers from the last time, it already pre-fills my data context and my layout page. So all I need to do is pick the product model. That's it, one click. Pick the product model. It defaults to the right data connection. It defaults to the right layout page. It gives me the name of products controller. So now I can just click add. And Visual Studio is going to scaffold out almost an identical looking controller and almost an identical looking set of views with a few small exceptions. So here's our controller. I can scroll through, or I can see there's a little drop down at the top right that shows almost all the methods in alphabetical order. So I have create, delete, edit, and index. It even has a product exists. So if we try, it won't add a duplicate ID. Yep, Braden, that was the whole idea, is Microsoft said, you know what? Anytime a developer builds a table, they're probably going to need create, read, update, and delete methods. So why make developers write all this code repetitively? We can build it, we can auto-generate the code, and then the developers can just modify it as they need to. It's far more productive this way. So here's our products controller. In views, we've now got products with our 5 methods. Yeah, a student asked me in my Monday class, so why do we ever use PHP? And my answer was, I don't know. You know, I would never, personally, I'd never use PHP for a new project. If a client was coming to me and asked me to build a web application, this would almost always, I mean, under certain circumstances, most of the time, this is going to be my first choice because of how much it does for us and how structured it is. So now let's try the products scaffold. We don't have a link to it. We can add a link in a minute. But if I just change my URL to go to localhost/products, yep, because it's efficient. It's powerful and it's efficient. So my application's gonna, yeah, now there are MVC frameworks for PHP. There's a very popular one called Laravel that uses a similar pattern, but it still doesn't have as many code generation tools like ASP.NET does. So now we've got an index view. Yeah, the idea is, Daniel, absolutely. PHP is simple, so we like to use it to teach you the basics of how web programming works. How do we connect to a database? How do we do create, read, update, and delete? How do we kind of mesh server-side code and HTML? So we use PHP as a starter language. It's like when you learn to ride a bike, you learn to ride it with training wheels. So they say using PHP is like riding a bicycle with training wheels. Learning ASP.NET is like riding a motorcycle. But we can't start you with riding a motorcycle, right? It's too overwhelming. It's too powerful. We need to start you slow and you learn the basics with the simple technology, and then we can put a more sophisticated technology in your hands. Exactly, Lindsay. So you'll notice here's our product index. It's got name, description, image. It also, because we've connected the models, it knows that every product belongs to a category, because we set up these references that every product has a category and every category has a list of products. So we can add a product now. Okay, so notice on my create page, we get a form that's modeled on our product model. We have all the fields. And because we have this foreign key, it automatically builds the dropdown for us and populates it with the category. We don't need to write a query. We don't need to do a join. It's here automatically when we scaffold. So it's same in your assignment. When you build two tables and you set up the relationship properly, when you scaffold the views, the child view is going to get, for create and edit, we'll have this dropdown. So let's add a few products. So I've got shirts, bottoms, and shoes. Tell me a product you're wearing today or your favorite thing to wear, and we'll put it in our store. Okay, and Lindsay, could you put in, okay. Can you say something about the t-shirt? So we'll put it in.
I don't know, name, t-shirt, price $30, description, comfortable, like.
Okay, all right. We'll leave the image out for now. I'll leave the category as shirts and hit create. So our scaffold works, and it even shows us the related category in our list. I'll add some more. Okay, so Kevin's got a blue t-shirt. Kevin, how much are you charging for your shirt? Okay, we'll put it there. Okay. Okay, so Braden's got a Okay, Braden, how much for the shirt? Okay. All right, so I've got 3 shirts. I'm going to maybe create a couple of products. I want to create a few products in every category. So I've got shirts, bottoms, and shoes. So let's add a few other things. Let's see. So I'll create a few bottoms and I'll add a couple of shoes. So we should put anything you like in your store. Just make sure you've got maybe 3 categories and that you have a few products in every category. And notice actually I made a mistake in my data entry. I entered my jeans in the shoes category, but I can just use the scaffolding to go in and edit. Change that to bottoms. I'll add one more pair of shoes. So you can populate your store however you want. Okay, now obviously this is not a finished product website, right? There's more we would need to do with this, but the scaffolding is a really good place for us to start. So what we'll actually do next week is we'll want to make more changes to the models, views, and controllers in terms of customizing it so that it's more user-friendly. Obviously, there are some formatting issues in terms of things like some of the labels. You know, our prices aren't listed as in currency. Our list is not sorted. We've got some funky labels here, category ID. Like we need to polish this by making changes. We also would want to add more validation rules into our models. So those are some of the things that we'll want to do with this next week. But basically what we've done in class today, this is basically part 1 of your assignment. So whatever project you propose to build on the project website, you're going to have to translate that into models like we did today. Yes, next week is just a regular class. You're going to translate it into models, figure out the relationships between them, add the models to your DB context and add the override method. And you're going to add your database connection string. Except for your project, you're going to have to use Azure for your database. You're not going to be able to run your project on the local database because I can't mark it. So the other thing that I want to show you guys, because the only other piece of your assignment that we haven't really looked at is how do we actually deploy the web application to Azure? And Microsoft has a really useful tool for this. We can publish directly to Azure, but the best practice is actually to deploy our project first to GitHub, and then we can connect GitHub to Azure. Camila, we'll have to look at that after. Okay. So my project is connected right now to my local database, but if I deploy it up to Azure, the database connection won't work. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a database on Azure. I'm going to change my database connection here and run my migrations again to build the tables in my Azure database. And then I'm going to publish the whole thing. Okay. So for your assignment, I suggest there's probably no point building a local database for your assignment. You want to use the database you have on Azure. So many of you created it in class last week. I'm going to go over that process one more time now. And you can try to follow along with me if you want and build your assignment database now. As I said, if you already have an Azure database, you can use that one. You don't need to create another one. So I'm going to go to the portal. I did create a database last week, but I didn't think I was going to need it, so I deleted it. So I'll just go ahead and create a new one. And then I'm going to connect my project up and publish the whole thing. Once we do that process for today, we'll be done for the day. Yes, I think I did get rid of my database. So I'm going to go ahead and make a new one. So I'm going to create a database in the Azure portal. I'll just leave my existing resource group. I'll call my database. I'll just call it Wednesday. Actually, you know what? I'm going to configure it to choose the lowest possible setting. I want the basic standard database. And then I click basic here. It gives me 2 gigs only. I'll use this server from last week. So always make sure I pick basic, standard, and then choose basic. Except I don't remember my credentials, so I think I'm going to need to create a new server. Oh, I'll start again. Okay, my database name will be Wednesday. I will create a new server. Wednesday. I'll pick a location for my server. I'll pick Canada East. Oh, won't let me. I'll configure it again for the basic tier. So I'll create my database. And then I'm going to put the credentials for my new database in my app settings.json. So here's my server. I think I've called my database Wednesday. So Azure is going to run. It's going to take a few minutes. So you can't use integrated security with Azure. You must use your username and password that you set up in the Azure portal for your database server. I also need to open up the firewall to allow remote connections into my database. Elastic Pool, you want to say no to that, Lindsay? Cloud hosting will scale. If you have more users, it will replicate your application to multiple servers, but you pay for that. So we'll say no to that. We don't need the Elastic Pool. Basic. Click basic instead of standard. It's on the left. It's to the left of standard. It's the lowest available plan. If you pick standard, it will, I believe, use your credits faster than if you pick basic. So it's created my database. I'm going to go to the resource now. And in the middle of this toolbar, I need to click Set Server Firewall. Again, I did do this last week, but I'm going over it again. And the instructions are also in the slides on Blackboard. So I'm going to click Set Server Firewall. And down here, I'm going to create a rule to allow any IP address in so long as they have the right credentials. So I'm going to call my rule all. And I'm going to start at 0.0.0.0. I'm going to end at 255.255.255.255. And I'll save this setting. So I've added my new credentials to Visual Studio. I'm not connected to my local database anymore. So I have a new database on Azure, but I don't have the tables. So if I go to Management Studio, I can register my server so we can look at it. So my server name is the one I just set up. My login. I'll test my connection. So it's connected to Azure in Management Studio now. So here's my local database that has all the tables. But on Azure, here's my Wednesday database I just created. It's empty. There's nothing in it. And you can see how much faster the local connection is. There's this lag time when we're connecting to Azure. So locally, I have the tables, but on Azure, my database is empty. So what would I need to do to rebuild my tables in Azure? Right, I can run my migrations again. I've already created the migrations and I've changed my connection string. So I should just be able to run update database. I don't have to add the migrations again. They're already added in the project. But now I want to apply these migrations to my Azure database. So I'm going to click update. And Visual Studio is going to run those same commands, but instead of running them on my local database, it tries to run them based on my app settings.json. So if I refresh my Azure database now, now I have all my tables. It didn't copy the data, but it did run the migrations again, which create the table structure. So for your assignment, you're only using the Azure database. There's no point working right from the beginning. You should be using Azure for your database. Don't connect to your local SQL server for your project. So now you'll notice if I go back to my project for a minute, so this page was connected to my local database. Now that I've changed the connection, if I go here, the page is now going to be empty because I'm now connected to Azure and my Azure database is empty. So I would need to repopulate my categories. Okay, so now I have my categories on Azure, but I don't have the products yet. So I would need to repopulate my database. Okay. So the database is on Azure, but now I need to publish the web application. This will just take a few more minutes and then we will wrap up class. I can stick around and provide a little help to anyone who needs it. So my project, my web application is local. It's using the Azure database, but now I need to create the website in Azure as well. So my site is live on the internet. So I'm going to go back to the Azure portal. I'm going to go to Home, and I need to create a new resource, which is a web app. So I'll just use an existing resource group. I have to give it a name. So I'll just call it Wednesday.azurewebsites.net. We're publishing from code and we have to pick a runtime stack. So we're using .NET Core 3.1.
Sorry, when you went to create new product, you went to new, then web, and then which one did you click again? Sorry, it was just a little too fast for me to catch up.
Well, you can pick whatever resource group your database is in, you can just pick that same resource group. That just groups them together. So let's say you're building 10 different projects for 10 different clients. You can group the website and the database for each one together.
No, I'm sorry. How did you get to create web app? Like, how did you get to this page? Sorry.
On create a resource. No problem. I clicked on create a resource.
Okay.
And web app is the third item in this list.
Oh, I see. Okay, thank you.
You can also search it up here. If you just type web app under app services, it comes up here as well.
Okay,
So then you can just create. Sorry, thank you. Yes, I do go too fast sometimes, so thank you for stopping me. So I'll click on create web app. I'll pick my resource group where my database is. I'll call it Wednesday. I'm going to pick .NET Core 3.1 as my stack. I'll just let the region go to wherever it wants to go. I don't care that it's in Australia. It should default to the free tier. If it doesn't say free, you'll want to change the size and pick the dev and test and pick free, F1. Because again, that will use your Azure credits at a slower rate. So we want kind of the smallest service plan. And then you just click apply. Then I will click review and create. And then I'll just click the create button. There's a warning here about application insights for monitoring. I don't really care about that. So this will take a minute. Won't take as long as the database to set up. Okay, so I've now created, it's created up my project. And then when it's open, what I need to do is so I'm going to go to my resource. So now I want to take the code I have in Visual Studio and I want to push it to GitHub. And then I'm going to connect this website to the same GitHub repository. So go to my Team Explorer. And I'll go to my changes. So this is lesson 4, scaffold, controllers, and views. So I'm going to commit and push to GitHub, which will take a second. Team Explorer will tell me, okay, it's successfully pushed. So if I check on GitHub, I should see my new version is here. Yep, so updated 13 seconds ago. Lesson 4, scaffolding of the controllers. So now in Azure, over on the left, I have this submenu, and I've got under deployment, I have a menu option that says Deployment Center. So I'm going to click on this Deployment Center option. And it's going to bring up a bunch of options for continuous deployment. So I'm going to choose GitHub. Now, I've already authenticated my GitHub account, so it shows my GitHub username here. The first time you do this, it's going to say not authorized. So when you click GitHub, it's going to open up a GitHub login prompt. I don't get it because I'm already logged into my GitHub account. So when I click on it, I then just click continue. It gives me a few options here. It doesn't really matter which version I pick. I'm just going to pick the first one, the app service. So it will automatically build our code from our GitHub deployment. So I'm going to click on that and click continue. I pick my GitHub account. It connects to GitHub, and now it brings up all of my repositories. Bear with me. Which repository? What's my repository name? It's my .NET duds repository. Which I don't know if I'm missing, or I just can't see. Hang on a second. COMP2084. Oh. Well, it shows here as, oh, COMP20. I have an extra. That's why. I just misnamed the repository. 2.0. There it is. I had an extra 0 in. And then it says what? The app service build. You could use GitHub, Lindsay. It doesn't really matter. So then it's going to pull from the master branch because I only have one branch. I'll click continue and finish. So Azure is now connecting and it's pulling down a copy of the source code from GitHub, and it's going to try to deploy this version of the project. So this is going to take a minute. So if I click browse right now while it's running this deployment command, it's going to try to load the website, but it just kind of gives me this starter page. This is just like a placeholder. And we can see it's running the deployment command. And this is set up for what's called continuous deployment. So what this means is every time I push a new change to GitHub, Azure will, every 60 seconds, the Azure portal will check GitHub for a new version. And if it finds a new commit, it will deploy the latest version to the browser, to the server. So I can basically just deploy my changes to GitHub and they will sync automatically to Azure. And if I make a mistake, I can roll back to a previous version. So I'll wait till this deployment's done and then I'll show you what that update looks like. It does take a little bit because it's got to pull the code from GitHub. It has to build it on the server and then try and serve the project. So once this is done, it'll tell us whether our deployment attempt succeeded or failed. It's really handy, Kunwar, absolutely. If it fails, there's a log here, and it'll show you any error messages if the deployment for some reason doesn't. And if you want to disconnect it from your repository, you can just click disconnect. Okay, so it says it was successful. And this commit is active. So now if I go back and try it again, I'll refresh my website. And now our site is loading. When I click on categories, it loads our categories. if I load my product, I'll call this Azure shirt. This product was created on Azure. Okay, so now my site is deployed. So I'll show you how the continuous deployment works. I realize it's 1 o'clock, we're almost finished. So the process is push your code to GitHub, make a new website in Azure, and then through the deployment center, connect your Azure website to your GitHub repository. So let's say I want to make a change to the code. I'm going to actually make 2 changes quickly. I'm going to change something on, let's say, the home page. Let's say I want to change this text. We can see how the continuous deployment works. And then I'm also going to create a Readme file because all GitHub repositories should have Readme files. So I'm going to do 2 things. In my Solution Explorer on my home page in Views Home Index, I'm going to change the description Microsoft gives us. So say, this site is built for COMP2084, Georgia College, Master uses .NET Core, SQL Server, source So I'll just put on a description. And I'll include the link to my repository. Would be a good idea you do this in your project as well. Okay, so I've saved that code. I'm also going to create a quick README file. So I'm actually just going to copy the content from my home page into my README file. So to make a README, the easiest way is right-click my solution. At the very top, I'm going to add a new item. I'll just let it default to text file, and I'm going to call it readme.md. Click Add. I'll just paste in the content. I'll just change the link at the end that says site available at, and I'll put in the link to my website. So your README file should include the link to your site. So I've modified my home page. I've added the README file. I'm going to push these changes to GitHub, and Azure, after about 60 seconds, it should automatically update our new site. So I'm going to go back to Team Explorer, and under the changes, L5, update homepage, create README. So I'm going to push these changes, save and push my changes. Which part, Lindsay, did you want? I can, but for your assignment, I want you to write your own README file that describes what the project is.
Yeah, sorry, this is just like, I like to have a version of like everything you've done to like, I guess you're going to push it to GitHub.
Yeah,
so
it's
never
on
mind.
GitHub. So yeah, you can view it on GitHub. So now if I refresh on GitHub, so my Readme file shows up here. That's interesting that the HTML markup didn't render. So now if I go to Azure, you'll notice it's already updated. So I didn't have to do anything. But if I refresh the site on Azure now, my home page is going to change. So now it's got my new home page with my link to my GitHub repository. So by pushing my commits to GitHub, it automatically updates the web server, so long as they're connected. Okay, I'm going to stop the recording for today, but I will stick around in the WebEx room to answer questions or provide any help. Okay, so you still have almost 2 weeks. You still have 13 days to do your assignment. So what we'll do next week is we'll take this scaffolded, this working application that I've built and deployed, and we're going to customize it. You know, we want to make it look better and we want to make it function better. Sure, I'll go over so to create the README file in Solution Explorer, right-click the very top level, the solution. You choose Add, New Item. You can just choose Text File and just change the name to readme.md. And then you can put the content in.